She was crowned a queen and smelled like rot beneath her silks. Imagine being enveloped in satin, your waist crushed tight by a corset laced with gold, your powdered face glowing beneath candlelight. You glide through the mirrored halls of Versailles, the scent of rose water trailing behind you. You are the epitome of elegance. But take a breath. Beneath the perfume lies something older, rancor, a sour stench that clings to every wall, every corridor, every embroidered hem. This is not a palace. It is a gilded theater of decay. For royal women, beauty was power. But hygiene, that was temptation. Doctors warned against water. Priests condemned the bathhouse. And beneath all the brocade and lace, bodies festered. Welcome to the hidden horror of royal hygiene, where behind every perfect portrait was a woman rotting beneath her ribbons. What if your cleanliness damned your soul? In 17th century France, to bathe was not a blessing, it was a risk. Royal women, trained from girlhood to sit perfectly still, to walk with grace, to never raise their voice, were also told one thing with chilling certainty: water opens the skin, and disease flies in. That was the science of the day. Doctors believed the skin had pores like tiny mouths, and warm water made them hungry. Hungry for sickness, for plague, for death. And so, queens and princesses turned away from the bath. Instead, they anointed their skin with cloths dipped not in water, but in vinegar, wine, or even urine. Substances believed to purify without corrupting the soul or risking disease. The church did not help. Public baths were called dens of lust, places where the devil whispered. Cleansing the body, they warned, could dirty the spirit. For a woman, especially one chosen by God to bear royal blood, modesty was more sacred than hygiene. And so, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Skin yellowed under layers of lead makeup. Sweat clung to corsets. Lice found homes in the folds of linen chemises. But no one dared suggest a bath. Even when water was used, it came with shame. Communal tubs were rare, and when they appeared, men always bathed first. By the time a royal lady stepped in, the water was lukewarm, clouded with residue and often tainted by the very diseases she'd hoped to avoid. This wasn't neglect. It was doctrine. It was protection. It was fear, masquerading as virtue. And Versailles, for all its splendor, stank. If a woman could not wash, she masked. Perfume was not just decoration, it was defense. The first line of survival against the invisible judgment of the court. Every inch of a noblewoman's skin was doused in fragrance, not for allure, but for concealment. Imagine waking up in a gown still damp with the sweat of yesterday. There is no soap, no fresh linen. You reach for your scent box, a carved ivory case filled with waxes, petals, and oils. You apply layer upon layer. Rose, myrrh, civet, anything to drown the human beneath the crown. But these perfumes were no gentle blossoms. Many were made with animal musk, extracted from glands and fat. Civet came from the anal secretions of a wild cat. Ambergris, prized among queens, was harvested from the bile of whales. The richer the scent, the more it clung, the more it hid. Some even soaked their gloves in perfume until they became second skins, masks of scent to protect from foul odors, and they believed disease itself. After all, the miasma theory ruled medicine. Bad smells caused illness, and so masking scent became a form of armor. But it was a prison too. The more they masked, the more they suffocated. Beneath the jasmine and lavender, the body still ached, the scalp still itched, and the skin, never clean, began to rot. A queen's perfume could cost more than a servant's yearly wage, but it could not hide the truth. She glowed in candlelight. She reeked in daylight. Her hair touched heaven, but it was alive. Royal hairstyles were not fashion. They were architecture. Towers of powdered curls, pinned with pearls, ribbons, even miniatures of ships or birds. One courtier claimed a duchess's hairstyle could block out the chandelier light. But what held them up? Beef fat, mouse fur, cotton, horsehair, wire, wax. These elaborate coiffures required a paste, a thick, sticky pomade made from tallow. It gave shine, it gave height, and it gave lice a perfect paradise. Washing the hair meant destroying hours, sometimes days of work, so women didn't. Instead, they slept sitting up, heads wrapped in linen to keep the style intact. Days turned into weeks, and the lice came, in colonies. Special lice combs and silver scratch claws became part of every noblewoman's vanity. They used them at court, mid-conversation, scratching beneath their wigs with discreet elegance while discussing diplomacy or music. Parasites were never acknowledged, but always present. The itch was constant, the stink unbearable, and still they smiled. Because at court you were either beautiful or invisible. Her hem was velvet. The floor was human waste. In a palace with over 2,000 windows and no flushing toilets, where do you go when nature calls? Anywhere. Versailles, for all its opulence, was a latrine of luxury. Chamber pots overflowed in closets. Curtains hid urinals. And many nobles, too impatient or too entitled, simply relieved themselves in hallways, stairwells, even behind tapestries. For a royal woman, whose skirts stretched 3 feet in every direction, the palace floor was a minefield. Every step a gamble. Lift your silk hem too high and risk immodesty. Too low and it drags through urine and filth. They were taught to glide, to float, not just for elegance, but for survival. Some even trained their maids to walk ahead with scented herbs or perfumed handkerchiefs, warding off the worst of the rot. But nothing could truly erase it. Not the fresh rushes thrown down on feast days. Not the lavender sprigs stuffed into corsets. The palace stank of sweat, rot, and human decay. And beneath her pearl-trimmed bodice, every woman knew, the ground she ruled was soaked in waste. She lifted a silver spoon to her lips and swallowed something alive. Royal banquets dazzled the eyes. Roasted pheasants with feathered wings still attached. Sugar sculptures glittering like glass. Gold-trimmed pies filled with dates, almonds, and meats. To be at the table of a queen was to witness abundance beyond imagination. But beneath the grandeur lay a secret. The kitchens were rotting. Versailles, for all its gleaming corridors and manicured gardens, had no reliable plumbing system. Waste pooled beneath floorboards. Sewage backed up into sculleries. On more than one occasion, human excrement seeped into the queen's private kitchen. Food was prepared next to filth. Rats and roaches scurried across tabletops, bold and unafraid. Raw meat hung in open air. Vegetables rotted in baskets. And spices, so expensive they were locked in chests, were used not just for flavor, but to mask the stench of decay. But what could not be hidden were the parasites. Royal women, expected to eat with grace, to take dainty bites and sip wine from crystal, were often harboring colonies of intestinal worms, tapeworms, roundworms, flukes, the guests no one invited, but who always arrived when meat was undercooked and hygiene forgotten. Louis XIV himself, the Sun King, was said to have passed a 6-inch tapeworm, likely contracted from a royal feast. And yet the banquets continued. Not eating was suspicious. Too little appetite was a sign of weakness or illness. So the women of the court smiled, sipped, and swallowed, hiding their nausea behind lace fans and ruby lips. In a palace obsessed with appearance, even suffering had to look elegant. While men could excuse themselves from court, retreating to hunting lodges or private rooms, women had no such luxury. They were expected to perform, to charm, to laugh, to dance, to flirt. But inside their silk stomachers, many were fighting a war of digestion. The food they consumed, spoiled meats, fermented milk, worm-ridden fruits, wreaked havoc on their bodies. Some women developed chronic dysentery. Others suffered painful bloating, nausea, and vomiting. Most simply bore it in silence. There were no antacids, no modern antibiotics. Cures ranged from swallowing mercury to purging with vomit-inducing herbs. One countess famously carried a perfumed handkerchief at all times, not to smell sweet, but to hide the scent of her own uncontrollable illness. Another noblewoman wrote in her journal that after a royal ball, she collapsed in her chamber and bled from both ends. This was not scandal, it was routine, and yet the performance never stopped. To admit discomfort was to admit weakness, and in the cruel theater of Versailles, weakness meant social death. She screamed, and the crowd applauded. Childbirth, that most sacred of female experiences, was, in royal circles, a spectacle. When a queen went into labor, the court gathered like spectators before a stage, not out of love, not out of empathy, but to witness. The reason was paranoia. Royal bloodlines were everything. If a child emerged stillborn, or worse, female, courtiers feared a switch might occur, that a nursemaid could swap the infant, that a false heir could be planted. And so the solution was simple: make childbirth public. When Marie Therese of Austria gave birth, dozens of courtiers crammed into her chamber. Priests whispered blessings. Doctors barked orders. Noblemen leaned in for a better view. The queen, pale and sweating, had no say. Her screams were muffled by lace pillows, her dignity stolen by protocol. She was not a woman in pain. She was a vessel under surveillance. Marie Antoinette, decades later, was no luckier. During the birth of her first child, the crowd grew so oppressive that she fainted, overcome not only by pain, but by heat, shame, and suffocating judgment. And yet, there were no sterile tools, no sanitation, hands unwashed, instruments uncleaned, and bedsheets stained from previous births. The result was often death, infection, fever, internal tearing. Royal women died in their beds, surrounded not by family, but by watchers. To be born royal was to be born under a gaze, and to die royal was often to do so in front of one. She felt the scalpel before she saw it. There was no anesthesia, no epidural. If labor stalled, if the baby twisted, if the bleeding started too soon, the solution was not mercy. It was intervention. Midwives, though revered, were rarely trained in hygiene. They moved from one mother to the next, hands coated in blood and pus, sleeves soaked in afterbirth. Tools were reused without washing, cloths dried by the fire, still red from yesterday's tears. And when infection set in, they called it childbed fever, a poetic name for death by filth. In some cases, physicians would perform emergency operations, crude incisions made with rusted blades or heated irons. The mother was held down. Screaming was inevitable. Survival was not. But even surviving childbirth came at a cost. Many women were incontinent, prolapsed, or barren by the end. But they were expected to smile, to host, to be beautiful, and then to conceive again. Childbirth was not a rite of passage. It was a recurring trial, one you endured not for joy, but for dynasty. She glowed in portraits and rotted in life. In an age before foundation and filters, beauty had to be sculpted, painted daily onto a canvas of skin that never breathed. And at the height of royal vanity, nothing was more prized than a white face. The paler the skin, the more noble the blood. Tan was for peasants, sun was for the poor. But to achieve this unnatural pallor, royal women turned to a deadly secret: Venetian ceruse, a white lead-based paste, soft, creamy, and fatal. It spread easily over the face, covering blemishes, redness, and signs of age. It left the skin luminous, a ghostly glow that artists adored and courtiers envied. But lead doesn't rest on the surface, it sinks. With each application, the poison seeped into the bloodstream. It ate away at tissue, caused hair to fall, teeth to loosen. The skin it once perfected began to crack and peel. And so more was applied, more powder, more poison. It became a vicious circle. The more they wore, the more they needed. Over time, many royal women developed what was politely called a pallid condition. In truth, they were dying, slowly, exquisitely, beneath their masks. A queen's smile might sparkle at a ball, but it often hid bleeding gums and decaying flesh. Her eyes gleamed, but they were blind to the cost. To enhance the gaze, noblewomen used drops of belladonna, a toxic plant that dilated the pupils. The result was stunning: wide, dark, mysterious eyes. But the poison blurred vision. Regular use could cause hallucinations, blindness, or death. Worse still was kohl, a thick eyeliner favored for its dramatic effect. Royal women applied it daily, believing it made their eyes look larger, their expressions more regal. But 17th century kohl often contained mercury and lead, both absorbed through the delicate skin around the eyes. With time, sight faded, eyelids twitched. Some women went blind in one eye. Others developed tremors, elegant hands that shook beneath lace cuffs, smiles that twitched, jaws that clenched without reason. They called it nervous temperament. In reality, it was mercury madness. But to appear youthful, to be desired at court, to keep a king's eye, that was worth the price, even if it meant going blind, beautifully. Her kiss left perfume and the taste of metal. Royal breath was not fresh. Dental care, when it existed, was often worse than nothing. Toothbrushes were rare. Paste, if used, was made from burnt bread, crushed bones, or salt mixed with honey. To mask the rot, noblewomen chewed herbs like cloves or mint. But the real remedy? Coating the teeth with acid. Some women believed that rubbing lemon juice or vinegar on their enamel would whiten the teeth. It worked, briefly. But it also dissolved the enamel, exposing nerves, making eating a torment, and blackening the teeth with decay. In portraits, royal mouths were often painted closed. Lips were full, flushed, and silent. Because in truth, behind those lips were teeth cracked to the root, or none at all. And when the pain became unbearable, the tooth was yanked. Not with anesthesia, not with care, but with tongs, force, and prayer. For women who ruled the world, chewing a roast could mean bleeding for hours. She stood in silk, but her body was a battlefield. By the end of the 17th century, the royal woman was a living contradiction, drenched in fragrance, yet unwashed, draped in lace, yet crawling with lice, painted to perfection, yet poisoned by every touch of the brush. Her beauty came at the cost of her body. Her poise masked constant pain. Her grace was rehearsed over rot, rash, and illness. She was worshipped, desired, imitated, and suffering. Even death was not the end of appearances. Royal corpses were dressed, perfumed, and displayed for days, even as they decayed. Embalming was crude, the body bloated, discolored, weeping fluids beneath its fine garments. And still, courtiers came to look, to nod, to murmur praise. How serene she looks! How noble in death! They never saw the sores, the parasites, the blackened gums. They never knew the agony beneath the powder. But history remembers. They powdered their faces with poison, breathed the air of excrement, gave birth before strangers, died behind perfume, and we called them elegant. The worst hygiene practices of royal women were not accidents. They were culture, doctrine, expectation. Behind every jeweled crown was a woman enduring rot, parasites, infections, and poison, all for the sake of appearances. So the next time you see a painting of a duchess, flawless skin, towering hair, lips like roses, remember what the paint is hiding. Not beauty, but pain.